1984 was a big year for me. It had nothing to do with George Orwell's book 1984. For me, it was just as nightmarish. My wife and I were both quitting our jobs so that we could move to London and I could train for the ministry. And everything seemed set until the brown stuff hit the fan in rather large quantities. That February, my mum had a fall, bashed her head, went into a hospital for what we thought would be a routine few days, but unfortunately she had major organ failure and within a couple of weeks she died. She was 56. Then in August our second child was born, a little boy. We discovered he had congenital heart disease. So there were bits of his heart missing. He only had 3 chambers in the heart instead of 4. Some of his arteries were on back to front. I mean, when you read the list, you couldn't believe how he was alive at all. But it meant he needed emergency surgery when he was a month old, heart surgery when he was a month old. In October of the same year, I got a phone call to say my dad had been taken into hospital, kept falling over or something, and it turned out he had cancer, brain tumour I think, and within a couple of weeks he also died. He was aged 57. Our son was in and out of hospital all the time, very fragile with this deformed heart he had. Our son was taken into Great Ormond Street Hospital after he passed out once for emergency surgery, and it wasn't successful. It was very experimental. They didn't really know what they could do. But sadly he died in the operation just before his 3rd birthday. So yeah, I'm a barrel of laughs. But the shortest verse in the Bible gave me hope. The shortest verse in the Bible is Jesus wept. It comes in the story of his close friend Lazarus, and he turns up to the house having heard that Lazarus is sick. And when he gets there, the sisters of Lazarus tell him it's too late, that his friend has died. And it says that Jesus wept. I guess he wept because it hurts when your friend dies. And I guess he wept when he saw the sisters crying. Grief is so uncomfortable for us, especially other people's grief. It's so uncomfortable, it even made Jesus cry. I've hesitated so long making a video on this subject because I knew this would happen, that I'd be talking about grief and you'd be there feeling really uncomfortable. And I really don't want to do that to you. Unfortunately, the shocking statistic is that 100% of the people that we love and care for are going to die. So I think grief is something we really need to talk about. Jesus said the people who mourn will be blessed because they will be comforted. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. After 30 years of grief, here's a few things I've learned about grief. So grief, what is the pain of grief? What causes the pain? Grief really is love that has nowhere to go. So obviously when a person that we love dies, we don't stop loving the person. We still have love for them, but now that love doesn't have anywhere to go. It's like a electric circuit, whereas when it's attached, the current flows back and forth, and so the whole thing works. But now there's a disconnection in the circuit, and so the love builds up inside us, but there's no release for it because the person's not here anymore. Grief and love are part of the same package, so you could have a life without grief, but it would also have to be a life without love. And I think all of us just want to experience love in our life. For most of us, it's the point of living. Some good news though, you will laugh and you will smile again. It feels like the end of the world when somebody dies, but you will laugh and smile again. An important thing to learn, I think, is that we don't move on. Sometimes if you've been mourning and grieving for a long time, friends with a good heart really will tell you it's time to move on. But how can we move on? Can we just move on and leave the person we love back there in the past? I don't think that's helpful. We don't move on, we move forward with them, with the indelible mark they've left upon us. We move on with their love, with their memories, with their photograph, with memories of their laughter and their smile, their sayings and their doings. And you know, grief isn't experienced in a vacuum. You don't just have grief. It's mixed in with all your other emotions as well. And that's why it's complicated. There isn't just the mourning, but there's all your other emotions in there. And sometimes the advice from well-meaning friends that we stay strong is really unhelpful, because really sometimes what it sounds like is, I want you to be strong in your bereavement because your grief is making me feel uncomfortable. So I want you to be strong and get through this and move on. But it's really okay not to be strong. It's okay for us to feel weak and be weak for a while. It's okay. We don't have to be strong. Some scars never fade, and it's perfectly all right years later to suddenly feel grief. That's quite normal for it to come back a long time after the event happened. Another thing is that acceptance isn't a finish line. Coming to acceptance of what's happened doesn't mean that we're free from grief. It just means it's kind of become part of our life. It may change as time goes on. Sometimes it's like an old knee injury you had that you don't feel most of the time. But when the cold weather comes, you get twinges again. Sometimes grief becomes part of our life like that. Jesus wept. He knows the pain of our grief. If we're honest, we're all a bit broken, aren't we? I don't think I've ever met anyone with all the dots on their dice. It's taken me 30 years to come to a place of peace with what happened on top of all the other stuff that life throws at you. And I probably put on a brave face, but really inside I was dead for a lot of the time. I really hope it won't take you that long to find some measure of healing and peace in your own life about the grief that you've suffered. There is a measure of healing from grief, but it really doesn't come with a magic prayer in church, you know, a sort of 5-minute thing after a service. Depending on the person, it may take a professional counsellor or therapist like it did for me. It will certainly take you being gentle with yourself. It will take you discovering the inner child, that little you that remembers your childhood, that's wounded because of what's happened. And what we need to learn to do is learn how to nurture that inner child, because that's the one that's feeling the pain. It's the real you deep inside. We need to find that child's voice and listen to that voice and do things in our life to nurture that child and heal that child. Sometimes wounded people speak to themselves in a very harsh way, in a way that they would never, if they were finding a little child in tears, they would never speak to the child in that way. And yet they speak to themselves harshly in their mind and in their heart. The Bible does talk about healing. It says in Psalm 147, He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. So I want you to take heart today that it may not feel like it, and often it won't feel like it, but God is by your side. It seems like He has a special place for wounded souls, especially those wounded by grief. Psalm 34 says, The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. If you're struggling with these kinds of issues, I have put some helpful links in the YouTube description below. Please have a look at those. Also, let me ask you a few questions. How about you? Have you had a loss that's been hard to come to terms with? If you have, what things for you brought you some sort of healing and hope during those dark times? And finally, what positive memories do you have of the person you've lost that you find helpful to remember from time to time? So if you're watching on YouTube, do leave comments below on your thoughts on grief, what you've found helpful, what you found difficult, those types of things. Let's be kind to one another. If you're watching this in a small group or a church, you can discuss it together after the video is finished. So to get notifications of new videos, do hit that red subscribe button and the little bell icon. And do go over to our website, rsvptrust.co.uk, for more videos. Thanks for joining me today, and let's talk again soon.